Hey folks, good to have you here. Today I'm joined by Alexander Love for the second time. And well, hey Alexander, welcome. It's good to have you.
It's great to be here, Forrest. Hi, everyone.
And today we're gonna unpack something. My heart's already starting to beat a little bit quicker. Um, you and I both of our fathers passed away in our early 20s, and we wanted to explore um, yeah, today we're going to explore the experience of losing our fathers. Uh, so yeah, um, before we did that, it felt like it might be wise to do a grounding or centering practice, which you've graciously offered to be available for. So
Okay.
maybe I'll turn it over to you to help us land.
Yeah. So this is for Forrest and I and all of you, so that we can enter into a place together where there's a certain kind of listening, so that we can explore together what it means to be human in this world that we find ourselves in. And so just wiggling your feet a little bit, noticing that you've got feet, seeing if they're on the floor and if you can feel them there on the floor. Noticing that if you push into the floor a little bit, the floor is very strong, it's very stable. And by pushing into the floor, you can feel your own bones. Feeling what it's like to feeling what it's like to have bones, something that's beneath the movement of the ocean. Feeling that strength, that enduring strength. And then seeing if you can feel that strength, not just in the bones of your feet, but through your whole body. Where do you feel your bones? What's it like to feel bones? Have you ever been asked to feel your bones? And if not, what's it like to feel them for the first time? And if you have been asked to feel your bones before, what's it like to meet them again? Living bones, strong bones, luminous bones like the moon. And then from that place of inner strength, sensing your heart suspended, the heart space, a well of awareness, and a place from which listening occurs, and allowing the spark of life to be present there. The kind of spark that always leans in, whether it's difficult or ecstatic, just leans in and says what's next, and is filled with brightness and curiosity and wonder. So from there I think we can begin. Worth.
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. I feel touched. The spark of curiosity that always leans in. So it might be helpful to create some context for our listeners around our exploration today. And yeah, I know I'm personally so today we're exploring the passing of our fathers, as I mentioned in the beginning. And my father passed away just over 8 years ago. I'm 32 now. He passed away a few days after I turned 24. Um, August 7th, 2015. So that might help orient to me chronologically or in the world of time. Um, and he passed away from cancer and had cancer for 5 years before he died. So I can share about the journey of, I can share all kinds of things, but I can speak more into that and about that. Um, I notice my hand goes to my heart when I ask you if you want to share about, give some context about your father passing.
Yeah, sure. So I was 20 and I was in Boston at the time and I was studying music and I got a phone call from an old friend of the family who told me that my dad had been killed and he, there's a lot to the story, but he was a lawyer and without going into all the little details, essentially the courts held money that he had won for somebody because that person owed money that was sort of inside the court system. They were behind on child support or something, and so the court system withheld the money that my dad won for this person. And it seemed like maybe they didn't really understand like that it wasn't in my dad's power to get that money for them. It was a court system choice. And so he hired three younger people to kill him. They were actually 18 and 20. The guy who did it was 18 and the other two were 20, as far as I know. Um, and yeah, so that I was 20 years old. So this Friday I'll be 46. So it gives a sense of some timeline there.
There's almost like my awareness is like a dreidel that just spins when you say
Mm-hmm.
this. It's like there's just so much to explore, and I'm aware you have a TED talk where you share, that I've seen and that's available to the world, where you share um, quite a bit about this experience with your father. And something in me is just in service of landing and really getting here. Maybe I can share that um, something I want to connect with you around is, for me, my father passing away was the most catalyzing event of my life. I had a very distinct before my dad died life, and then a very distinct after my dad died life. And there's quite a number of moments that I can point to, and insights and shifts that happened. And so I want to check with you and ask on, in terms of severity of life experiences, where does your father passing away rank in terms of impact and influence on your life?
Yeah, well, I think I have this similar experience as you. I mean, it was the most impactful, the most life altering experience that I'd ever had. Um, I mean, I was going to school for music, and somehow this wasn't conscious for me, but it wasn't long after that I put the guitar down for 20 years. So, I mean, I and went into healing and I I mean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, which it turns out to be like the center of what I do as a human being. And so, yeah, it was certainly the most catalytic awakening. And I don't mean to say that at the moment that it happened, there was some sort of catalytic awakening, but I'm talking about the awakening that um, is like slow drips over decades of inquiry and um, it's one of those very weird things because my if I were to describe my experience of being human now, um, I, I would just relate to it as such a gift that I could never have fathomed being in relationship with so much love in the cosmos. And I don't know that I can't say, but I don't know that would have been accessible without having to unravel all of that pain. And so there's this interesting tug between, like, of course I wouldn't want my dad to die, and yet so like everything that's beautiful and that I can connect with what feels to me as beautiful feels like it came through that learning journey.
That resonates deeply. First of all, on the turning to healing work, I mean, I was working in corporate finance and doing infrastructure development before my father passed. And um, after he passed away, I dove in on all my passions and just really, I really had an existential crisis at 24, and really, I had been thinking, I've come off of stoicism and things like that, like, oh yeah, meditate on your own death, that's important. When my dad died, and I eulogized my father at his wedding, and there was something that happened in me around, like, wow, I'm really looking out at all these people, seeing everybody at my father's funeral. There was something happened in me of, I'm going to die as well, and might as well live before I die. um, and there was so much pain and so much to unravel, to use your word, from my upbringing with my father, and also from the experience of him having cancer for 5 years and then from him dying. Um, and that's ultimately led me to here, and um, you and I do very similar work in the world in a lot of ways. Um, so I find that really interesting. The similar trajectories in some way, similar unfoldings.
I'm wondering if you would share a little bit more about that shift. I'm aware that this is a particular thing that's been on my mind recently because I've been writing about it. But you mentioned the funeral and this sort of, I guess I don't have a particular question, but I felt like when you were speaking about this sense of earlier, before and after, and the sense of the immediacy of the recognition that death is real. And then somehow that was coming up as you were speaking about the funeral, just wanting to like see if we could slow that part down a little bit and kind of unpack it a little.
Yeah. the there's a moment after I uh eulogized my father. There was four people who eulogized my father, and I was the last one to go. And um at the end of the funeral, my grandfather's brother came up to me, and it was a very interesting moment. I had never experienced him like this, but he looked at me and he said, Forrest, my entire life I've experienced you as a boy, and in this moment I experience you as a man.
Hmm.
And to this day, that still impacts me. That's still having consequences on my on me in this moment. There's echoes of that now. Um, but I am the oldest child in my family, and I remember going home that night for dinner, and there was, a bunch of people at our table, and all of a sudden I was sitting at the head of the table with 15 or 16 people at dinner. And so there started to be these symbolic um, reflections of a real transition that had happened, like that I had actually had a death in that moment. Um, and the prior to that, I had thought a lot about death. I had meditated on death. There's a lot of Marcus Aurelius teachings, or meditate on your death and think about the life you want to live. But something in the moment of his funeral and this process dropped that from concept into the body. And looking out at all the faces in the crowd, seeing my father's friends, and me, and I stood next to him, eulogizing him, speaking about what we leave behind after we die, like legacy and children. And um, I'm very grateful. My father, I really feel like, set my mom up financially to be taken care of for the rest of her life. Um, which is something I'm still very, very appreciative of today. And um, the last bit of my father's career, the last decade, he was a financial advisor, and I still have people come to me this day and say, "Hey, we just put our kid through school using a financial plan that your dad helped us create, 15 years ago." And I was very conscious of these kinds of dynamics in my dad's funeral, and I wanted to name that and honor that in him, the impact he had in the community and his forethought and foresight. So these are words that are happening in response to yours. How's
Beautiful.
this to hear?
Yeah, it reminds me something you were speaking, it flashed into something that I hadn't connected to in a long time, but I remember after he passed, it must have been the summer after he passed, because um yeah, I went home for that summer and spent a lot of time with friends, and I went to this concert, and I'm trying to recall the name of the singer. He sings this song called Freedom. He's from the 60s. Freedom, freedom. I have to look it up. I didn't want to look it up while you were speaking because it just flashed in and I didn't want to multitask and just be there with you. Um, but this man, he he was from the 60s. He was a 20, he had been my age in the 60s. And so he brings, decades of depth. And by that time, he had more of a grandfather energy. And I don't remember what he was singing about, but I remember as he was singing, there was this recognition that it was like the king had died and the prince was becoming the king, and I felt like it was too soon. It was like all of a sudden you're sitting at the head of the table. I'm not meaning to imply it felt too soon for you, but that's what sort of provoked this memory. And just sitting with that and not even knowing what the hell that meant. I mean, I'm 20, I wasn't having like, really deeply complicated thoughts. It was just like, shit, what now? What does it mean to run your life
Mm.
when you've never considered running a life? Because that transition, I was in early college, like that transition hadn't really happened. And my mother, while a very loving human being, um, was has never quite been like the parental, like I'm gonna hold your life for you kind of um, it wasn't that kind of love. She offered a different kind of love. So yeah, so that's what comes up.
Mm. Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm struck by the just how, I mean, I had 5 years of my dad being sick before he passed, and then you had just this, it sounds like to me you just had this moment, this phone call. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm
Yeah.
really struck by the, because something in me was, when you were saying I wasn't having deep thoughts, there was something in me going, I was having incredibly deep thoughts, and a lot of that was catalyzed because this existential crisis was 5 years in the making.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was I mean, in many ways, I think I was in shock. I mean, um, just as some context and why this conversation we're having is such a perfect moment to have it is that, in this book that I've been writing, it's about a lot of, it goes through a lot of territory, and the majority of the book that has been written has, it's about a new way of understanding development and how we grow up and all that stuff. And then now what I'm doing is going back and weaving my personal story throughout the book, sort of flash forwarding and flashing back and kind of moving around because I want to convey, I want to bring it to life, not just through poetic description, but I want to bring it to life also through how human beings live and and how they hurt and how they die, and so for me, because of that, and this is just the context I wanted to bring in, these stories are very uh, alive in me right now because I've been going into where they live inside of me and finding the places where they're sleeping or they've been hidden because I was checked out at the time or something else. And so they're very present, um, not as memory, but they're present as living history. Um, so anyway, I just wanted to offer that and to say that, in those moments, I feel like there was just a lot of disbelief, like not disbelief. I remember sitting, so I got the call in the sort of late afternoon. I went to my friend Melanie's house. We had been like in relationship, but a little bit, but we were mostly friends. And um, she was like the one person that I really trusted. Like there was some sort of a heart, like I just trusted in her. There was something about her that felt deep. So I went to her house, but she wasn't home. And so then I remember just kind of like walking in the streets of Boston. And then I don't remember anything. I don't know how I got on the train. Like there's a big gap of like
Mm.
went to Melanie's house. She wasn't home. I remember walking down the street. And the next thing I know, I remember I'm on a train, a night train that's, going from Boston to Philadelphia. And this wasn't an era where there was devices. There was me, the train, some person, random person that I told, and of course had no idea what to say to me. So I'm sitting there and there's nothing to distract. I have no books, I have no water, I have no food. I'm just sitting on this train and the fluorescent lights are flickering in that creepy way, and the windows, they're jet black because it's night. So I'm looking out the window and I can just see myself and I'm just repeating to myself, like, he's dead, like like what, like there was no comprehension, like that's all I remember thinking the entire 7 or 8 hour train ride, because there was just this kind of like, how do you even start to,
Mm.
you know fathom this kind of thing.
I'm having all kinds of experiences as I'm hearing you. I almost feel like I'm in the train with you.
Mhm. Yeah.
And how is that for you? Not having a not having this clarity of what happened between the walk and how you got to the train.
Oh, that's, to me, that's what it means to be alive with history. We have like, there's so many gaps, and again, not to zoom out too much, but I think your question, where it brings me is a fundamental question of what am I? What are we as human beings? And if we include that we are our cosmic origins, like we have atoms in our bodies right now as 14 billion-year-old ancestors wiggling their way, you know. And so like if my point being is if we include ourselves as an unfoldment of our entire history, there are a lot of gaps, a lot of gaps. And, when I think about diaphaneity and this kind of ability for light to pass through something and to bring that which has been sleeping into awareness, and when I hold that in the context of our entire, even just our human history, not to mention the rest of it, I mean, I find that downright terrifying. The idea that we could potentially open ourselves up to the whole to such a degree that that would be available. This, of course, has to come in little doses. And it makes sense why we have huge gaps. That particular gap, I don't have much feeling about it. It was probably filled with things like going back to my apartment, like there, it may have not been giganormous things. Maybe it was. Maybe I had all those deep thoughts. I really don't know. But there's other places like walking from the parking lot into the funeral home, and what happened between those moments and then the walking into the room where we were viewing him laying there. Those are places I have questions. Who did I talk to? Did I talk to anyone? Was I standing there awkwardly? And that's where, was I standing there with friends? Was I there with family? And that's where I explore trying to invite the dissociative parts in me, if they'd be willing, because I know I was there somewhere. And just that's for me in the process of writing and trying to rediscover these stories, to invite those parts to give some room to see what else was going on.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love this question. What else was going on? That feels I feel the opening. I feel an opening. And there's as you're speaking, I have a memory of there was a friend of mine who came over before the funeral, and she looked at me and she pointed at me. She looked me square in the eye and she said, "Don't drink any alcohol and don't smoke any weed," before I eulogize my dad. And
Oh
I'll be
wow.
honest with you, I was in a genuine question of whether I was gonna smoke some weed or do something to help me with how intense the experience was. And um, in some ways, it was a miracle for me that I got up there and didn't. I wasn't under the influence of any substances.
Yeah.
But I feel, or I'm present to the amount of pain that I was in for years. I mean, for decades, really. Um, and was doing the best I could to cope. And Something about this moment feels like all of that is welcome here, and I like that.
Mhm.
I like that a lot.
I think that that welcoming for me was what allowed this to become catalytic. I mean, it was catalytic either way, and it would have directed me in a new direction either way. But, you know, as a means of a perfect metaphor, when I got off the train, this was in Philadelphia, and it's like a subterranean, you know, it's like underground where you get off. Or at least it felt that way. Somehow where you got off the train was at a different level than the ground floor of the 30th Street station. And the escalator was um, strangely steep. At least it felt that way. And so I'm going up this escalator. This is, you know, 1 in the morning. It's the middle of the night. And I go up and you know, these are these old buildings that have this kind of, you know, beautiful architecture. And I could only see the ceiling as I'm sort of rising, you know, the lit ceiling. And so it's like, you know, it's like a dark, you're like in this dark hell realm, you know, you're I'm coming up and I can see the ceiling and uh, with such beautiful poetry, there's a silver heart shaped balloon that's some kid or somebody had like let go of, and it was nestled into one of the those like ceiling squares, and it had love written on it. And
Hmm.
and I come up, and then there are my friends. You know, we had a very unique, at least it felt unique, um, group of friends in high school. There was a way in which, at least to my experience, there wasn't a lot of judgment. There was a lot of encouragement. There was a lot of room for people to, before we had words like, be your authentic self and like discover your passion and like just be who you are and like all that kind of stuff that's sort of second nature to where you and I might find ourselves today. We didn't have any of that. There was no like weekend workshops on like being authentic. Like we were just kids, you know, trying to relive the 60s. And somehow we managed to be like really beautiful to each other. And so, my point being is that this experience, sort of the first moments of this period of my life, it was love. It was a welcoming that would later become consciously clear that like that's the thing. That's what turns hell into blooms. That's what turns razor blades into tulips, and like that's the thing. And at the time, that's not what I wasn't like contemplating this, you know. And it would be years before I would really get it as something I could practice and do something with. But it was all there at the beginning.
As I'm just letting in your share and it's impacting me, what comes up for me to share is that one of the things that was most one of the things that was most painful for me, that I really didn't see at the time, was that my parents were so it was almost like positive psychology, like we're gonna stay in this orientation that dad's gonna heal, like we're always gonna stay positive, um, stay focused on the outcome of him healing. And there was, because of that, I didn't realize it. until even recently in the past few years, but there was never a conversation where I got to sit down with my dad and be like, okay, like you're gonna die. Let's talk about it. Right.
Yeah.
It was always about the next treatment. It was always about the next surgery. And there was never acceptance and just really dropping into reality. It was always kind of living in this story. And potentially more painful is that since my father has passed away, I have one sibling, a younger sister, but my mother and my younger sister and I have never sat down together and talked about my dad dying in the last 8 years. We haven't had a single conversation as a family unit about it. And I have made efforts to invite that, and it is not. It's probably it probably pushed it down the timeline the way I went about seeing it happen. So um, there was something that struck me when you talked about razor blades and tulips. Of there was I kind of had before he died the tulips that were actually razor blades, um, and then finding that things that felt
Yeah.
like razor blades were actually tulips.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
In this moment, my awareness is going out into our listeners and um, just checking. Like, I wonder how this experience is for
Yeah.
folks who are listening. And
Yeah, I wonder if, and this is something that kind of comes up as I'm writing because I'm focusing so much on the stories now and I'm not focusing on the rest of it. It often brings up this question like, is this too much story? Is this too much? And but the thing that you know, um, that I hope for our listeners, I hope that you can feel the the love that is in this. Like, I've worked with human beings, helping them heal for, 2 decades. And like human beings, they go through a lot of shit. And we're talking about certain things, and they can sound loud, like, oh well, my dad wasn't killed, or my dad didn't die of cancer and have to go through that. But the reason why I share these stories is precisely because this is the human experience. It's not about the for me so much like did who's had this degree of pain or this degree of content that's like similar, but that everybody is walking through the world forever confronted with ecstasy and pain, or the possibility for ecstasy and the possibility for pain. And I hope this feels like there's a transmission beyond like just two guys talking about their dads, which is a beautiful thing and is part of what's happening. But that there's also hopefully an invitation into a transmission. And by that, I don't mean something that Forrest and I are transmitting to you, but that we are in a transmission of possibility around the power of really, really touching into how we hurt and then bring something to that. And that's sort of what you're describing. Your family didn't want to talk about it. And I didn't really have a lot of folks to talk about it with either. But I would have been, uh, I would have probably been like your mom and your sister at that age. I, I was disconnected from the pain in my body. I didn't know how to do that yet. I was just 20, I didn't know how to do that. And my nature was to be like positive and like a golden retriever. I'm kind of golden retrievery in my nature. And so, putting those together, avoidance of pain and the tendency towards being a golden retriever, it was just like, oh yeah, like let's make this good. And it's because I didn't know how to have the tools yet to be with the really hard stuff. Like I wouldn't have known how to be with it had I found it. And I appreciate that. Um, I think it helped me survive um, long enough to find teachers who could show me how to touch the pain and not be so crushed that I couldn't get up.
As you say this, I imagine that everyone listening, including you and me, is in contact with pain in this moment in some way or form.
Yeah.
And
And I'd
so,
invite oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, no, you go ahead. Yeah.
I just also would like to invite, if any of you are leaning in towards like um the territory of like, oh, this is sad because this happened to Forrest, or this is sad because it happened to Alexander. I certainly want to love you in that and love your care in that. And also invite what happens if you um, lean back in towards the places in you that hurt, if that's something that you're open to touching, so that your care doesn't in any way become a way to not touch that. Because it can be easy to make it about, oh my God, like that's so intense, like how sad for him. And I'm not in any way against that, because underneath that is just a desire for love and care, and I get that. But at another level, sometimes it can be a way to focus on the pain of another and not really feel how everybody hurts. And look, if you've had a quote unquote perfect childhood with no scraped knees, we live in a world where we've enslaved people, we've raped people, we've blown each other up, and this is who we are too. And so even if our life has been of the utmost of privilege with no real deviation from harmony, we still enfold a history that is quite brutal and quite beautiful. And that lives within our cells, it lives in our bones, it lives in our blood. Our ancestors are not separate. They're pulsing inside of us through our gestures that we don't even know their names, but it's pulsing. And if you want it to sound scientific, epigenetics, man, look it up. It's a thing. We pass things on. We're holding it. We're holding our history.
Yeah, and I've hearing you and before you spoke, I was feeling an invitation to invite everyone who's listening. I mean, Alexander was just mentioning getting in contact with the places that we're hurting and the places that we might be in pain. And I just feel called to invite everyone who's listening and um, I know in our last recording we've gotten over 70 downloads already. So you can imagine, I don't know, maybe 100 people here with us for anyone listening. Um, and you might just notice what it's like to be present with 100 other people, including Alexander and me in this moment, where we all are just taking a moment to be in contact with any places in us that feel some pain or feel some hurt. notice it's a real treat for me to get to be in the presence of others, in contact with our pain and our hurt together, a little more consciously, a little more intentionally.
And if it's okay, I'd love to add to that. Now I'll see what it's like to feel the sensations of pain, but to feel that the sensations of pain um, are nested within something that's soft, something that only turns towards, is ever present, and profoundly healing. It's a nectar through which any wounds can heal, and it's a coming home for the places in us that are crying and that are yearning and that are searching. And that this love is an ever-present possibility, a well that these places in us can drink from. And noticing that it's one thing to be have our pain be next to this love, and it's another thing for these places of pain in us to actually absorb the love. And then that distinction is literally the difference between healing and not. And what's it like for those places in us to absorb that love that we're holding together as human beings in the world?
I just had a very young Forrest run out into awareness who really wants to give dad a hug, holding him and holding him right now. The only words coming to me right now are to tell you I don't have any words coming to me.
Mhm. Well, does this seem like a pausing point in terms of completion to you, or does it feel like a pausing point that wants to bloom into something continued?
It feels like a pausing point for now, for over here at least. How about for you?
Mhm. Yeah, it does have that feeling of I can't I can intellectually could come up with probably places we could go, but I can't actually feel a direction that is bubbling, um, which tells me that perhaps it's a completion point.
Yeah, it gets me curious because I feel concretely in the body. It's uh, like in the hara, a few inches below the belly button, and there feels something so. I get this gesture of um, pulling something down and grounding. And what happens in me as I'm sharing this is just I feel really connected to the number of men that I feel who don't feel um, it's like the phrase fatherless men is coming to me, and that may mean like even if your father's not hasn't passed away, there's like my hand goes to my heart and my solar plexus of feeling like a longing for the
Yeah.
father.
I mean, it does bring up another territory for me, actually. Um, I think, with something like losing a parent, the it can be easy to focus on, you know, Alexander, the guy, because that's who I go to sleep and wake up uh, in most close association with on a daily basis. And yet, the thing that's also been quite alive for me is I've been on this. Uh, I've been in relationship to someone who took his life. Relationship, I mean, not directly yet, but there's someone else out there who grew up, who was like very much similar age as me, and likely grew up in such different circumstances with such, I am guessing, much less love than I was given. I don't know that to be for sure, but what little bits of context I know, um, this human being wasn't given the same privileges that I was. I don't know what it was like to be, what their parents were like, but I do know what the system is like that they grew up in. And this is something that has been um, alive for me recently because I discovered that there is a way that I could meet this person. And I had been thinking about it and putting it off. And then Tucker Walsh, he sent me a video, and I only watched the first 10 minutes of it. And I can I can make the link available so that if folks want to see it, they can. But the first 10 minutes of it, it it showed this person interviewed this person who had done horrible things and was given love by the mother of the daughter that he did terrible things to. She lost her daughter and I believe her grandchild, if my memory serves, as a result of this guy. And she chose to give him love. And you get to see the impact of that on this person. I think, and I say it that way with emphasis because I think there's a tendency, it's so easy to make someone the villain. Oh, these were bad people, blah, blah, blah. And then we put in all of our little bullet points about why they're bad. And it's just so much more complicated than that. And so after I saw that, I was like, all right, it's time. And so I started the process and just learned about a week ago that basically what happens is they reach out to the person he's been in jail ever since. They reach out and they find out if he's willing to have a restorative conversation. Um, and if he is, then they work with both of us separately, and then we have a single meeting where we get to interact with each other. Could be in person, could be on Zoom. And I just heard back a week ago that he agreed. And so it started this process of, aside from the intensity of what that just brings up in me in general, it's also felt like it's opened up a little bit of a doorway to feeling into this guy. I mean, I have over the years, but now, what's he thinking? Why did he say yes? What's his story about who he is and what he did and why it happened and why he made those choices? So all that to say that after a certain degree of working through my personal pain, of which I still work through, there has opened, there's been an ability to open to, okay, well, what about him? What kind of life does someone have to lead to be able to even do this in the first place? That sounds really painful. Yeah.
So just so I'm clear, you're going to have a restorative conversation with the 18-year-old at the time who killed your father.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's no small thing. And I don't, just to make the link, I'm speaking this because of what you spoke about, fatherless men. And while I don't know anything about the father of this person or the mother of this person, it it woke up for me, reminded me this dimension of the whole thing, of the question marks I have. What was this person's father like? Did they have a father? Did they have a mother? Um, did they have a community that was holding them with love? Did they have a system that gave them opportunities? So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that link was clear. It was a connection that was very clear inside of me, but I didn't really make it explicit.
You have a date for this meeting, the restorative meeting?
Not yet. Um, now that they got an affirmative that he was open to the conversation, then it sets a process in motion, um, where first he and I have conversations separately with I don't know what they call them, a caseworker, something person who understands how restorative justice works and can help prepare us in whatever. I mean, they've done this a number of times and I've never done it at all. So I don't know what needs to happen for preparation. I'm also bringing with me, years of training from amazing teachers who showed me how to be with discomfort. And I'm not sure if in a prison, if I'm pretty sure that in a prison that those kinds of things are not readily available. And so I think that, I mean, my assumption is that because he agreed, there has to be some degree of self-reflection, which I could only imagine would include some dimension of regret or shame or pain related to choices made. Of course, I don't know, but I assume so because I believe human beings are good and that when they do things that hurt people, they feel it somewhere. And so I think that there's a need for also helping him prepare for how to encounter. I mean, what's it like to sit across from the son of the man that you killed? I can't only imagine.
Something over here is like, well, if you could have any son of any man who was killed to run into, I would pick you for sure. That's
Yeah. I want him to experience love. I don't have any evidence that he's felt that. He very well may. He might have one of the most loving mothers in the world, one of the most loving fathers in the world. I have no information and no story about that part of his life. I do know in some general way where he grew up and how he may likely have been treated based on that. But I want him to feel love because my experience is that in all the movies, I just watched this movie. It's so good. It was a Puss in Boots, like part 50 million. It's like about a cat who's like a hero and everything. And it's just expected at the end the villain like has a shitty time. Like they're the one that gets exploded or like they die and then there's quote unquote justice. And to me in relationship to real human beings that's just nonsense.
hmm.
But we have that narrative. It's just like, oh, there's a two-dimensional cardboard cutout in prison for the rest of his life. He deserves that. So like we're not going to think about him. We're going to think about what does Alexander need? And like that's my point is like it I think that's the opposite in a way. I mean, yes, what does Alexander need? What does Forrest need? What are the people that have sort of experienced the blow in that way? What do they need? Like, of course. But when we have villains or people that we put as villains, but we don't realize it's like the good villain movies show the humanity of the villain. They show the villain's pain. They show their origin, where they've come from and what built them. so that we can hopefully have some sense of humanity, and that we're actually asking the question, what's it like to sit across from the man whose father you killed? Like, that's a very intentional question, to try to invite that we look at this thing of being human in a way that includes the ones that are causing harm, because they have so much trauma. There's so much trauma in prison, not even just from being in prison, but the population, a prison population. And so, like, from our perspective of understanding how we work with trauma, what does trauma need? It needs love. It needs care. It needs skillful means, not harshness and things like that.
In this moment, I feel present to just so many terrains and trajectories and territories. There's so many different lines I feel like we could go down, and um, the I'm in an orientation of just seeing all of them. There hasn't been a strong impulse into any of them.
I'm curious. Um, I just kind of went on a roll there for a little while. I'm just curious what bubbles up for you hearing all that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. This is what I mean. There's so many different territories, and um, one thing that continually comes for me is when I. It's interesting to look at um, because we're talking about the villain and um, victim dynamic, and my father wasn't murdered by another person, and I have taken my awareness into his cancer and gone, what was it like for the cancer?
Hmm.
Um, what was it like for the cancer to start in the neck and spread all through the body and to grow and eventually take over, I guess, and um, to feel the joy, honestly, of the cancer of just growing and spreading and flourishing, and that's not something I've ever said to anyone, but but it's something I've done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same gesture. It's just a non-human version of it. I mean, you're obviously human, but the other in this case is non-human, and it's the same gesture.
And I will say that when I bring my awareness into cancer, or when I bring my awareness into my father's cancer, I do get a real sense of wanting to let love in.
Mm.
Now I'm taking my awareness back to the listeners and wondering how this is for folks being with us. Yeah, I guess there is a question in me around like, hmm, I noticed in our last recording and in this one, we're continually checking in on our listeners, which is something I really appreciate, the sensing and listening into the field and into the larger we. And uh, I also sense there's a lot of capacities to zoom out and get bigger, and I have this wanting to almost get even more, what's it called, involution, or get younger and get into the more human experience of, um yeah, what's it like to be 20 and lose your father, like the what's it like to be 24 and lose your father, maybe not so much from the universal uh perspective, but more from the human young man.
I mean, for me, it was hard to feel that.
Yeah.
So there was, you know, earlier on there, I don't I don't remember feeling a lot. I was mostly disembodied and joyous, um, as far as I knew. But it wasn't so long after, about 23, 24, that, I found myself a spiritual path whose goal it was to, um, get me out of here.
Mm.
And it gets tricky with spirituality because, it's a whole community and a whole bunch of books that all say the same thing. And everybody said, the purpose of human life is to, go back to your origin, but emphasis on getting out of here. Be a duck, with the water dripping off you, and but not, soaking in, like all those kinds of that imagery. And it fit very well into, someone who is more avoidant and more leaning towards dissociation, um, lacking the tools. And so there was a period where I think there was a lot of pain that was probably very visible to others, but wasn't so visible to me. And then a lot of my passion was put into this particular meditation tradition. Um, because I confused the crying and yearning of my parts for my soul's longing for union, because they didn't really give any differentiation. It was just like, oh, you feel grief? It's the grief of the separation between you and your creator. It's like, well, like maybe it has something to do with daddy issues. Like, come on, y'all. Like, it's written all over my young face. Like, y'all, there's something else going on here. And I think it's where psychologically informed spirituality is so necessary,
Mm, mm,
because there is a deep longing, I think, for human beings to feel union with something big, but that's also then mirrored
mm,
in the pains that we have. And it's not enough to pass by that by just doing a lot of meditation in your third eye or something to try to pull yourself up. And so for me, it wasn't until later.
mm,
I had been an acupuncturist and then a coach for quite a while, and I didn't really think that real change was possible, which seems ridiculous saying it out loud. But I felt ambivalent about it because I was projecting my own experience.
mm,
Any of the issues that I had had inside of myself that I was aware of, I hadn't seen them fundamentally change until I met Kim Barta and he showed me how to do shadow work. And then it was like, oh, and this was, lots of years had gone by before that point, since my dad had died. But it was then that I was now able to start finding ways to be close to my pain. And so a lot of the pain, there was pain all along, but it would be more like I'd be driving in a car and um, an ambulance would go by with all of its sirens, and I would just burst into tears uncontrollably,
mm,
and then I wouldn't cry for the rest of the year.
mm,
Like I used to be a once a year crier for a
mm.
while. But then once I started learning how to go inside skillfully, which means going in with love and presence, that's when the pain started to become much more accessible, as well as all those years of learning how to help people heal, coupled with increasing degrees of sensitivity, which makes the pain louder, and subtler things that one might not notice is now noticeable. So there's like a lot more pain, but it comes with a lot more capacity. And so it kind of balances itself out. So that's what it was like for me
Mm.
in terms of like the human, and some of that manifested too as ambivalence and sort of distancing a little bit from everything. It's probably what made me read so much like integral theory and like thinking about stuff. It's like that way in which
Mm.
it's that way in which like our protective mechanisms can sometimes work out really well.
Yeah,
It's like it made me study and think a lot,
yeah,
which isn't the end of things, but it does help. It does help.
yeah. That's well. First of all, I'm really struck when you mentioned Kim's name because I'm I feel like, we're an hour and a half into this conversation, and now I'm starting to understand the key trajectory points of, um, yeah, both of us losing our father, the significance of the event, the different dynamics, also meeting Kim and the impact that he had on us in terms of turning towards pain and how we both stepped into healing. I'm starting to get the arc of a shared story
Yeah.
here that we have. Um, yeah, something in me is like, that probably would have been supportive for a more coherent exploration today. And um,
Oh, I thought you were going to say it would have been really useful if I had met Kim when I was like 21.
oh,
I
of
was like,
course.
that would have been like such
Yeah.
a the yeah, what a difference that would have been.
Well,
That's why,
and
yeah, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's probably similar for both of us, but I mean, that's why I'm even having this conversation in public and why I dedicated my life to helping people. Um, because, to be perfectly honest, I mean, there's a lot of really amazing things in the world that people are doing to help people. And there's a lot of amazing things in the world that are there to help people that don't know how to bring pain to its resolution. And that's what, you know, Kim, and he was the first person to show me how that could happen. So that at some point after that, I was no longer in question about whether healing is possible. And so that's why I like to have these dialogues, because I want to make sure that as much of the world as possible knows
Healing's possible.
healing is possible. Most things are workable,
Yeah.
even the things that feel unworkable often are.
Yeah, and culturally, at least in Western culture, from where I sit and in my judgment, we haven't quite gotten to the point where we turn towards pain. We're still in the take a pill, numb it, uh, try and beat it out, like whatever it is. It's always suppress, repress, push away, uh,
Yeah.
medicate, or I mean, even some early stages of body work are like drop your elbow into it and just hammer away until it breaks up the breaks up the adhesion and or or I mean I to this day am one of the things I'm most impacted by was when my father was sick. I mean the treatments that he did, the chemotherapy, the radiation, the surgeries. My dad, there was nothing in any moment, and he went to Johns Hopkins, the best hospital in the world for the kind of cancer he had. And I used to tell people he looks like a Holocaust victim. I mean, he
Mhm.
played middle linebacker in college and was 6 foot, 220 pound, strong as an ox, man. And when he died, he was probably 115 pounds, like
Mm.
couldn't even hold his own body weight up, couldn't eat food anymore. I mean, he had a feeding tube. It was like there was something intuitively or in the body just going, this is so wrong or something so off that
Mm.
we're um I used to call it nuclear bombing his body, chemotherapy. Like I would
Yeah.
just say, it was like when we I used to make a metaphor that I was hoping would land with people of um if when the SEAL Team 6 went in to get Osama bin Laden, it's like this very precise small group going in to get one person, and yet when someone has cancer, you just attack every cell. I mean, it would just be like carpet bombing the whole planet to try and get one person. Um, so anyway, I could go into that for a while, but I feel touched by like it's in my opinion it's a developmental move to shift into turning towards pain and actually seeing the pain as
Yeah.
the nourishment for continued unfolding.
Well, and I think that, this is, one of the things that I'm trying to highlight in my book is how all these stages of development are dimensions of a human whole with, we might call the sort of the middle of that human whole, the heart and soul of the human whole, culminates in these stages that begin creating modalities around how to turn towards our pain. Um, our listeners may have different we may share different language, different frames, but whether we're looking at postmodernism and early integral or 4.0 and 4.5, or without any of that language, the the developmental territories that begin exploring how to look within ourselves, find the places of pain, and then engage with them reciprocally, eventually being able to prioritize wholeness as the one that is doing the embrace. To me, this is the center of the human world. We can talk about these later stages, we can talk about earlier stages, but I feel it's so important to emphasize that middle, just like we have our lower bony cavity and our head, and then we have our our chest cavity as the middle. It's what houses the heart. It's what houses the heart and the lungs, and they both are inhale, exhale. The blood flows away, the blood flows towards the heart, flows away from the heart towards the heart. There's this middle, this in between, this intermediary, there's a gesture of reciprocity leading into integration. This ability for being with, recognizing that the killer has pain too, or that the cancer has its own experience, or that nobody's a two-dimensional cardboard cutout. And I feel like those particular developmental waves,
Hmm.
that's one of the biggest gifts that they've given us. And if we can accentuate that, it's why I love that, like, modalities like various forms of shadow work and things like IFS, internal family systems, and like the those kinds of things are becoming so popular, because I think that is such a major key. Talking about our pain is beautiful, but it doesn't always take it all away. It can sometimes, but I haven't found it to be reliable to just talk through it, but to be able to talk it into being and then know how to embrace what has arisen into being. That's what takes us to the next place. And then we project what we're doing inside onto the world. So if I'm in the practice of finding pain and darkness inside of me and embracing it, then if you have a bad day, I'm immediately going to bring understanding and care to you. If I'm pushing all the things in me that are uncomfortable away, and then you're expressing something I find uncomfortable, I don't have any practice knowing how to navigate that. And so then we exile each other and we cancel everybody, and it becomes a big mess.
The smile or the laugh is opening into totality. Like I just feel like being here with you, I could go in any direction right now and explore absolutely anything. I love it. Mm. There's an awareness in this moment of particular forms of consciousness in me that were incredibly difficult to turn towards at certain points in my journey, and how much courage, and I don't even know where that courage comes from. Like, if you really drop into the source of the courage to go, okay, this is here, let's turn towards what's here and be curious and open and wonder what's what is this. That becomes an easier gesture, to use your word. I call it a dance move, but that becomes an easier dance move after some reps. Um, and I just feel like naming that we're discussing this, and in the practical experiential world, that there's been several times where that's felt like it was gonna kill me, or it was gonna end me to do that.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, something deeper than what I was identified with in that moment came through.
Well, and there is a death, in a way, when there's a differentiation from, there's a death of fusion with something, and then all of a sudden what was taking us over is now somehow in our awareness in a new way and can then change. And that means we might have to become different, and that can be terrifying.
Well, and then the more it seems, the more we do this, the more I hang out with people who've done a lot of this, the more it seems we can just be who we are, and the different dimensions of us, the different expressions of self, of awareness, can come out into come out into the light.
My experience is that the pain doesn't, well, the pain becomes more subtle but more loud, and there's much less resistance. So then there's actually much less suffering and a sense of ease around the presence of pain. It doesn't throw me, usually it doesn't throw me for a loop anymore. It's just like something is arising, and it's not, I don't feel like it's trying to hurt me.
Mm-hmm,
And so
mm-hmm,
and that's something that I would invite as a possibility in the field, and to the listeners, is like, what would a life be like with not so much a reduction in pain, but a reduction in our resistance to it, and what's the impact of practicing a way of being with pain um, that doesn't allow the gesture of resistance to be the predominant feature. I'm not saying that, I mean, eh, most any time that there's a new experience in me of ouch, I don't know about every time. It's still not so uncommon that if there's some new experience of ouch, there isn't a little bit of allergy to it initially. But it's like the allergy of, like, um, you get a little bit too close to the oven and then you just kind of move away like a quarter of an inch. It's not like taking a baseball bat and starting to hit the oven.
yeah.
So there's a little initial resistance. And I'm trying to say that to say it's not like an either or, like you're either resistant to pain or you're not.
Mm-hmm,
But it's like, even the resistance to pain, is there room to step back just a little bit from that,
mm-hmm,
from a place that's never resistant to anything? and to like what happens if we as human beings practice that kind of being with, what would happen around our resiliency and our ability to be with like difficult humans that do things that bug us,
Hmm.
or humans that have hurt us. How would all that change?
Yeah, and at the same time, one of the most important things in my experience has been also the freedom to close and to
Mm-hmm.
contract and to say, hey, that's enough. I need to I need to stop and rest and recover and maybe try and open again later. Like I really did not give myself permission to do that for a long time. I was so much in the opening and get curious and invite in, and that was coming from one ego construct telling other ego constructs that they needed to do that. And it was a dominant dominant part, uh
Yeah.
who had kind of learned how wholeness is supposed to be and started took upon a life mission of instructing everyone how things work.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I can feel as you speak that, I can feel how, uh, especially in the earlier years before I learned how to do something about being with pain. Um, but even I can feel as you speak, I'm like, oh, I know why I, resisted closing down. It was like if I closed down, there wasn't any, like that was it.
Mm,
I was the
mm,
only one that was going to keep in my mind. I mean, I had loving people around me, but in my mind, it was like, oh, if you close down, like that's it. There's nobody, no one's gonna survive you. You got to keep yourself alive, dude. And so I'm just smiling as you're saying that, and I can feel, you know, I can feel the places in me that resist that. Um, and the reasons, like the reasons why there's resistance around that. And so I'll just gladly open to that and embrace it.
mm. So maybe let's pause here for now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Any parting words that you want to?
Yeah, I'm struck by in this recording with you today, I am just present to like, oh, the places we could go. Like I felt there were so many times when I felt a potentiated impulse that didn't fire to go into certain things, and something over here was trying to like, um I don't know, get a theme or get something to sink into that I feel like people could really take away. And I feel like together we just kept opening and opening and opening, which I love. And I'm also like, I feel like I could record 60 hours of content with you, exploring different terrains, and I would love to do that. And it's challenging, like for me, from the perspective of the role of podcast host, to see like, um when we get together and explore and just let aliveness take us in the moment, how will that be for people listening? So I'm curious to check, like, if anyone's made it to here with us, I'd love to hear from you how this exploration has been today. And I'm really appreciating feedback from folks. um so I feel vulnerable saying that, um but that's what's with me as we're closing.
Yeah, thank you, um, for inviting this particular conversation. Um, I haven't been shy about sharing my story, but I usually do it in the context of just a few moments, so that in the context of teaching, usually, so that people have a sense of my humanity, and that when I say I think everybody's good deeply, they're comparing it to experiences, that I'm not just some like detached positive guy who's like, just say positive things, man. Like, it's to give a little bit of weight to, like, when I say that, it's, I've looked at this for a long time. But this has been a chance to go into some of these stories a little bit more fully, um, which I've been doing, as I mentioned, on my own with writing. And um, it's just a delight to be able to do that, and do it with you and with our listeners, to hopefully just, reveal the shared humanity, and that I think our listeners can feel that we're speaking about human things and about human story, but we're also holding them in a certain way. And I hope that it's especially for any folks that may be playing with sort of the quote unquote later stages of human development, which can sometimes start to abstract from some of these more personal things. I hope that this can be a model for a modeling for how, as we grow up, we're not leaving things behind. In fact, they become more dear to us, because we're not just holding our own personal narrative, but that personal narrative is part of a much larger tapestry.
I feel quite a bit of energy hearing your last share, and I also am. I'm just gonna, yeah, keep receiving that on the way out, I suppose. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Alexander. Um, I different, maybe it's slightly different to your experience. This is the first time I've ever publicly recorded a conversation about my father passing away. So there's some real tenderness or vulnerability around. It's not something that I haven't talked about personally, and it is something I haven't talked about publicly in this way.
Yeah.
So I feel completely safe and resourced, and like incredibly grateful that it's gotten to be here with you and with the listeners who we have. So just thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.